Welcome back, students, for Math 140. This is section 6.3. I'm your instructor, Cindy Enrique. So now we're going to be factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient is not 1. So now we have this ax squared plus bx plus c. So if you want to do the AC method, that's totally fine. So we are going to be doing the AC method. So remember, using our AC method, we're going to have A times C up on top, B down below, and we're going to rewrite our B value so that it multiplies to our A times C and it adds to our B value. So okay, so let's look at things. So I have that my A is equal to 4. I have that my B is equal to 16. And I have that my C is equal to 15. So up on top, when I do A times C, that's going to be 4 times 15. And so 4 times 15 gives me 60. My B value is 16. So I want to think about two numbers that multiply to 60. Divided by 4 is 15. 5 goes into 60, I believe, 12 times, and 6 times 10. There we go. So those are all of my multiples of 60. So I want to make sure that I pick a number that is going to multiply to 60, so there are all my multiples, but adds to 16. So the only one that's going to add to 16 is a positive 6 and a positive 10. So a positive 6 and a positive 10. So I'm going to rewrite this. So I have my 4p squared plus 16p plus my 15. So what I'm rewriting is that middle term, and I'm replacing it by what I have over here. So now I'm going to have my 4p squared. Okay, this is where the magic's happening. This is where I'm replacing my b term. I have a positive 6p and a positive 10p, and I still have a positive 15. So when I split it in half, the first two, what they have in common, looks like it's a 2p. So I'm left with a 2p plus 3. Over here, it looks like I have a 5 in common, so I'm left with the 2p plus 3. So I can definitely see that the 2p plus 3 is going to be my common binomial factor. So whatever is left over is going to go in its own parentheses. So what's left over is that 2p plus 5. So that is one example of doing the AC method, okay? Now, if you're not a fan of that method, that's fine. Let's say you're a fan of the guess and check, or trial and error. So let's do guess and check. Some people like the guess and check. Personally, this is the way that I was taught it, so I'm going to go ahead and do the guess and check here. So I know I'm going to have a parentheses. So I'm going to look at what the first term is. That's a 5a squared. So the only way to get 5 is 1 times 5. So I know that I have a 5a and an a. Okay. The next thing I'm going to look at is my last. So that's a b and a b, because I have my 6b squared. So to get 6 is 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Now, since I want this middle term to be a negative 29, then that means I want my numbers to be really big. So 5 times 6 is 30, so I'm going to put my 6 here and my 1 here. And if I want 29 to be negative, then I'm going to have a negative 6 and a positive 1. That is going to be my answer doing the guess and check. And if you're like, oh my goodness, how did she do that? Well, I did it by lots of practice. Remember, I've been factoring for several years now. But if you do not like this guess and check, that's fine. Go back to the AC method, okay? All right. So for number 3, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, what I see in common is this. I see that I have a 16, a 62, and an 8. All three of those numbers are even. So that tells me that at the very least I have a GCF. So it looks like it can be 8. Let's see. 62 divided by 8. I just plugged that into my calculator and that's a decimal, so that's not good. What about 4? Let's see. 62 divided by 4. No, that's not good either. So it looks like my greatest common factor is going to be 2. So I'm going to factor a 2 out of everything. So 16 divided by 2, that would give me an 8a squared. And if I have 62 divided by 2, that would give me a 31a. And 8 divided by 2, that would give me a 4. So I'm not sure if this would factor any further, but I can definitely try using the AC method. So if I'm using the AC method, I can see that my A is equal to 8, my B is equal to 31, and that my C is equal to a negative 4. So okay, so that means my A times my C is 8 times my negative 4, and that's a negative 32. My B value that I have is a 31. Well, that tells me that I'm going to have 32 and 1. 32 is going to be negative, or sorry, it's going to be positive, and my 1 is going to be negative. Why? Because I want it to add up to a positive 31, so my bigger number is going to be positive. So I'm going to rewrite this. So I still have a 2 hanging out on the outside, but now I have 8a squared, and now I'm going to write this as a positive 32a negative 1a, and I still have my minus 4. So when I do that, I can split it in half. So this has an 8a in common, so I'm left with 8 with a, and then my 32 divided by 8 is 4. And they don't have anything in common, the last two terms, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1. So that'll leave me with an a plus 4. So I can definitely see that my common factor is going to be an a plus 4. So I have a plus 4, and I also have my leftovers. So my leftovers go in its own parentheses, and that's 8a minus 1. And that's right, don't forget your greatest common factor, that's there as well. So this is how I am factoring, okay? So for number 4, I realize that this is 4 terms. So the fact that it's 4 terms, I already know I'm going to factor by grouping. And of course, before I do any factoring, I want to make sure that there isn't a GCF. So I have 14, 8, and 7. So 14 and 8 is even, but 7 is not. So it doesn't look like they have anything in common. I have P, PQ, PQ, and Q squared. So no, there's no GCF. So I'm just going to go by splitting it in half. So the first two, let's see, 14 and 8. Well, they're both even. So I believe that a 2 goes into both of them. I also see that a P goes into both of them as well. So I'm left with the 7P minus 4Q. And here in the last two terms, it's a negative. So I'm going to drop down that negative sign. And it looks like I have a Q in common. So I'm left with a 7P minus a 4Q. And I can see that my common binomial factor is there. So I'm going to have my 7P minus 4Q. And I'm going to have my leftovers go in its own parentheses, so that's my 2p minus q. And that is going to be my final answer. Okay. So whether you do the AC method or whether you do the guess and check, we have some practice problems for you guys to go ahead and practice. So we have problems 1 through 9, it looks like. So you're not going to get any better by just watching me do all of these problems. So it's up to you for you guys to press pause on your computer and try to do these problems by yourself. So press pause. Okay, well, I do hope that you guys press pause and try to do some of these practice problems. So for that first one, I did guess and check, and I got 5t plus 3 and t plus 2. For number 2, I realized I made a typo. I have an r squared and I have an r squared. So that does not help me. So hopefully you didn't spend too long on number 2. It was a typo. I apologize. For number 3, I'm looking at it and I did the AC method. So 120 I got by A times C, so 10 times 12 gave me 120. So there was a lot of factors of 120, but I just made sure that I was methodical. So I went with 1, 2, 3, 4, and it worked all the way up to 10. So I saw that 8 and 15 add together to give me 23. So then from there, I made sure that I wrote that trinomial, 3-term polynomial, into a 4-term polynomial, and then I factored by grouping, and I got my final answer. For number 4, what's really going to be helpful is if you factor out a -1 before anything else. So once you factor out that -1 out, it changes all of your signs, and it makes it a little bit easier to factor. For number 5, again, the leading coefficient is negative, so I made sure that I factored out a negative. Now 16, 48, and 36, they all have a 4 in common, and they all have a k in common. So -4k was actually my GCF. And that 4k squared minus 12k plus 9, well, that can factor, and I factored accordingly. And for number 6, the leading coefficient was negative, so I factored out a -7u squared. And then I factored out the remaining trinomial, and I did that by guess and check. And if you're like, wow, I really don't understand that guess and check, that's fine. Go back to the AC method. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. And for number 7, I did that as well. I have n plus 9 as a common binomial factor, so I factored that out. So what was left over was that 2m squared minus 5m minus 7. And that can be factored further. So I factored that 2m squared minus 5m minus 7 into 2m minus 7 times m plus 1. And I still had the n plus 9 on the outside. And then that last one, second to last one, number 8, I factored that as well. I saw that my factors of 12 was 6 and 2, and my factors of 5 was 1 and 5. And again, I did my guess and check. But of course, you're always welcome to do the AC method. And for number 9, all 3 of those numbers were even, so I knew that 2 was going to be my greatest common factor, and they all had an n as well. So I factored a 2n as my greatest common factor. And I factored the inside as well. So that 14m squared plus 1m minus 4 got factored to 7m plus 4, 2m minus 1. Okay. Again, if you guys have any questions or concerns, or if you're stuck, please feel free to email me at any time. Okay, I hope that helps.